This war, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the psychology coming from the war. How are people going to feel after the war? What do they feel that's next? And I think there's, that's going to be a lasting effect. Again, I talk to market participants and I tell them that, and they say, not a problem. And, Qatar's had all this damage to its oil, massive damage to its oil field, gas field. Aren't you worried that they're going to bomb, the Iranians will bomb pipelines and stuff? And they say, we'll rebuild them. Not a big deal. They're very blasé about it, by and large. But I feel the effect will be, measurable. You're sure the heck going to see it in inflation. Inflation's going to be high the next year, 3.5% or 4%, because the tariffs are still working their way through. The Iran war is working its way through. There's a saying about gasoline prices, they can go up very fast, but go down very slowly. I think we'll see that as well.
Ken Rogoff is a distinguished professor of international economics and summa cum laude graduate of Yale with a PhD in economics from MIT. Perhaps most interesting to some is that he is a brilliant grandmaster chess champion who had an extraordinary career winning the U.S. Junior Championship before deciding at 18 to excel in economics. He served as chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. After teaching at Princeton, he is now a professor of international economics at Harvard. This is a moment to talk about global economics, as the war in Iran has caused huge swings in the price of oil, gasoline, and fertilizer. We'll talk about many things, including the Iran war, the control of the Strait of Hormuz, the regime in Iran, President Trump, also the global economy, debt, the dollar, interest rates, the Federal Reserve, and the risk of artificial intelligence. I'm pleased to welcome back Ken Rogoff. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, Charlie, it's such a privilege to speak to you. I'm very glad to be here.
Tell me first about Hong Kong. Are they back, or what has the transition there resulted in?
It was surprisingly upbeat. I had not been back to Hong Kong probably before COVID, at least. It'd been a while. And certainly what we read about it was very depressed. Obviously, the Chinese cracked down during this period and more fully took control. But, I would say they were feeling pretty upbeat compared to where they were. I still noticed that when I was walking around, I did a lot of walking around the city, everybody seemed to walk slower than they did before. Maybe they're a few years older. I don't know. So there was something in the air that was different. But yeah, there was a lot of stories about the crackdown, what they had to go through during the pandemic, quarantine. So one father told me, he said, I flew into Hong Kong. I was meeting my daughter, but we both had to quarantine. But we came from separate places, so we weren't allowed to quarantine in the same room, the same hotel, because they said she might have a different kind of COVID than you do, and we don't want it to spread. And so, I heard these stories, and they explained to me, you're in the hotel there, and there's no air. And so 3 weeks, it's just a long time. And there were stories like that. But, on the whole, they had been dispirited by people leaving for Singapore in the financial industry, by housing falling, and they're feeling better now. I was surprised how upbeat everyone was.
Notwithstanding, there's been some arrests that have disturbed people in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
Yeah, although I have to say I'm on the Harvard University Press Board of Syndics, and we had this book written by an academic, almost by definition, fairly left-leaning book. And pointed out that until 1983, the British didn't tolerate any free expression, cracked down on everything, and sort of decided, well, let's make life hard for the Chinese. And they introduced some different things. So I think that was interesting. I hadn't really thought about it, but when you read the New York Times covering what's going on in Hong Kong, it's as if Hong Kong had been, like New York City forever. And it's at least more nuanced than that. And people have memories. So they don't, obviously everyone wants free expression, but they don't necessarily have long memories of that. It was only phased in. That's true in a lot of Asia, of course.
What about China's economy?
Well, I think China's economy is still in a lot of trouble. The engine that drove China's economy was real estate, infrastructure, construction, not just that narrow sector, but everything that went into it, the materials, if you sold furniture, even the energy that went into it. They depended on construction more than any Western economy has. Really, by some measures, a third of the demand in the economy grew out of infrastructure, roads, bridges, and real estate, a third. So what people had been saying about China, we talked about it before and about how I had written about this in my book. We talked about how, they were overbuilt and they were in trouble. But there's a 40% savings rate in China. And they didn't have very large down payments. And housing prices went up and up and up. And so the typical person, even though prices have fallen, not that much, I actually think the big effect in China is just that a lot of people's wealth is in housing. 70% of personal wealth is in housing. And so the price is down officially 20%. And it's such a secretive country, when the official number is such bad news, you can imagine what the true number is. So people are feeling a lot poorer. I mean, there's some people who had a loan and are broke, but for the most part, you couldn't put 10% down and buy a house in China. It had to be much, much more. So they're in absolutely a consumption depression. They're in what we might call a deflation, that, there just isn't a lot of consumer demand. And it's going to be very hard for them to build that up, because that had been driving consumption, prices going up, and everybody feeling richer and richer. And now it's in the other direction. It's very interesting, because my classmate from MIT, Ben Bernanke, wrote this Nobel Prize winning paper that's very influential, influenced my own work. And I will say I teach his paper in every class I can. He argued that if you don't have a lot of leveraging, it's not so bad. And I think everybody thought, China, yeah, the prices will come down. But just like when our stock market comes down, particularly if it's not too much, 25%, it sounds horrible, but nothing happens overnight. But they're in a lot of trouble. They want to export their way out. They want to build electric vehicles. And by the way, they have amazing electric vehicles.
Yeah, people talk about their electric cars and they say, they're really nice. People who have been in them and have had accessed them in Europe or wherever.
Yeah, in places like Brazil, Indonesia, they just own the market. You can buy a really nice car for $15,000 or $20,000. I'm talking about a car with, a buffet in the back seat, a bathtub. I mean, whatever the heck you want. I mean, they have amazing cars. But that is, as great as that sounds, it's nothing compared to how important real estate was. And also, the world just can absorb so many cars for so long, and it's only willing to. So there's a lot of pressure. They want to export their way out, but they can't. They're too big. The hole is too big. So I see their economy is in trouble potentially for many more years. And I think over the long run, they're going to do better than us on a growth rate basis, because they're coming from a lower base, but they're not catching up and surpassing us the way Goldman Sachs and many others said, where by 2035, they'd be way bigger than us, or maybe they had 2025. I can't remember. They're very dangerous and they're very big.
Yeah. Well, I had the impression that what they were trying to do, that they were trying to create a consumer demand economy in China because they had a rising middle class. And that rising middle class would enable them to shift away from an export economy. But that was totally wrong, I guess.
Not totally wrong, but what it means to be middle class in China is a whole different thing than here. I mean, a middle class person in China would be in our bottom 10% here, by a lot of measures. The reason they don't have, it still doesn't work quite how you might imagine, is first, they don't have any Social Security to speak of. They don't have any kind of Medicare. You really, really need to save for your old age. They didn't let them have children. Like they had the one child policy for, 30 years or something.
They're now trying to reverse that, I guess.
Yeah, but it's hard. I mean, and they weren't reversing, they had to reverse it in a way that didn't admit they were wrong. So they started out by going, well, maybe some people can have two children. But why I'm mentioning that is you normally would depend on your kids maybe to take care of you. So there are many reasons that they don't have, lacking a social safety net, the middle class is nervous about spending. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's what everyone tells them. You've got to develop consumption. You can't export. You can't just build stuff. You have to give people consumption. And they've had trouble turning that switch on.
Do they talk about America and do they talk about the Iran war?
Well, they don't talk about anything else. I mean, they view it differently than we do. They are puzzled, why we're doing it. I don't think they're as Trump derangement syndrome as the Europeans or the Democrats, but they sort of do view there's a loose cannon on the deck of the world kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, in Asia, it's immediate. Like gasoline prices are up 25%. Asia gets 70, 80% of its oil through the Straits of Hormuz. And there's Russian oil that we're now allowing.
So therefore, has the price of oil and gasoline
much more there than here? It's not just the price has gone up. They're talking about cutting a lot of flights at Hong Kong airport because there's no jet fuel. I'm sure you've read that in Europe, they're talking about that before the summer starts, that they just may not have jet fuel. So boy, they're feeling it. They're thinking, well, you can't be that crazy. It's going to end, right? But they're getting nervous as every day passes.
Are they looking forward to this meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump?
To be honest, I didn't talk to any high-ranking Chinese officials. I was in Hong Kong when I was there.
Yeah, but you talk to smart people who talk to smart people.
Yeah. I think their Chinese are playing it very close to the vest. There is a tremendous amount at stake here in how the Iran war goes. You can say it's the best thing that happened to China because the U.S. has alienated its allies, not just in Iran. The tariff war alienated our allies. I've never seen the Europeans as mad about anything as they were about Greenland. I mean, that was just, they thought, wait a second, we were worried about Putin invading us to the east. We didn't know the United States is invading us to the west.
And openly talked about it.
Yeah, when I was at the World Economic Forum, that there was no other topic of conversation. And I was invited recently to be the dinner speaker for what's a group of all the finance ministers of the Eurozone, plus the head of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, and a few others. That actually, by the way, never had an outside speaker before. So they had to end the conference because they didn't have an institutional mechanism for including me. And it was, they're very energized about what's going on. I can't speak about what we spoke about, but I don't think I'd be giving away much to say Greenland got mentioned a lot. They're very energized about what to do about that. I mean, you can read it everywhere. So that's the Europeans. You can go to the Middle East, where in the Saudis, I spoke to a few there, and from the Middle East, and they're saying, well, we thought they were building these bases to defend us. We didn't know they were there for target practice, for the Iranians. We didn't know they were just a base of attack. They're very upset that the war happened at all. I mean, mind you, we don't know how it ends. We don't know how history will view it. But right now, they're not feeling a lot of trust.
But there is reports that they are urging the president to finish it now that he's started it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they're hurting more than anyone. They've suffered losses. I worry the Middle East is just never going to be. It's going to take years to get back to where it was. I was in Saudi Arabia maybe a little over a year ago, and they were just feeling like we're the next Korea. We are coming. I think President Trump even said that to them. What I mean by that is very, very few countries have made it, where they're countries, they get some coconut oil or, some commodity, and they're making money and they're not so poor, but they never developed the education system. You mentioned the middle class before. They never get it all going. And they were really coming, and they were really feeling it, and very, very painful. And, you can say the same about Dubai or,
and the UAE.
Yeah, Kuwait. Yeah.
I mean, in fact, there was much talk about certainly UAE and the Saudis, that they were very interested in significant investments in AI.
Well, it's not crazy, because AI equals energy. If you have really cheap energy, you have a big advantage with AI. It's very, very consuming. I think, that's something President Trump has gotten right in his vision to bring AI faster. That might not be right, that vision, but if you had the vision, having energy, I don't know how competitive they are. Swinging back to Asia, a thing I learned, if I read more extensively, I didn't need to go to Asia to know that, but Asia feels Japan, Korea are being big winners from AI. Why? Because they're very good at building memory chips, memory. And memory is the binding constraint at the moment. There's just not enough memory. I don't know what it would be in the Middle East. I mean, they're not going to produce, all right, I don't want to make a sweeping statement, but it would not be easy for them to produce something to compete with Claude or ChatGPT. I think for most of the world, except for China and the United States, you have to find a niche. Where do I fit in here? What do these big companies need from me? So that's an interesting question of what it would be in Saudi or UAE or these countries.
How do you measure the impact of this war and what happens at the Strait of Hormuz on the global economy?
I think it's way bigger than anybody's saying. They're trying to, fit it into a box and say, how long is the price of oil going to be up? What's the effect on the markets and how long it's going to last? creates a level of instability that is going to last for years. Now,
how will that play itself out?
Well, I mean, energy, fossil fuels are still important. And other things like helium and such that we didn't even know was so important. It turns out helium is essential in building Taiwan's chips. And as someone who is planning to go to Europe over the summer, I'm wondering, will they have jet fuel to get me back? But bigger problems are if Taiwan doesn't get more helium soon, they're not going to have chips that go into our cars, our phones, not to mention industrial stuff. So, but they're direct impacts. But the thing is, as it lasts longer, bottlenecks start to develop. For example, a lot of countries had oil reserves. They ran out. They had jet fuel reserves. They ran out. So, I mean, I think the effects can get bigger. And then the risk that it spreads, that China's, if they don't get a resolution to this war, is a big loser from it because they get a lot of their oil from Iran. Iran was their base in the Middle East. Well, don't assume it's going to go that way. I mean, it ain't over. Like, they're not going to take that lying down. And they may not be able to strike at the Middle East, but they can cause trouble somewhere else.
The Chinese.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, this is ultimately, I think, part of a larger geopolitical game between the U.S. and China. I mean, the war in Iran involves Russia. Iran was making all their drones. Russia, can get energy from Iran. China gets its energy from Iran. China wants influence over Saudi Arabia. This is, I guess they had this thing in the 19th century called the Great Game in Asia, where Russia and Great Britain were competing for power in Central Asia. And it was really not about the local war. It was about this greater struggle between Russia and Britain. And, this is that. It's, part and parcel of the tariff war, Xi cutting us off from rare earths, and you can go on and on.
Is control of the Strait of Hormuz becoming more important than whether it's amazing to say this or even think this, but does it have more near-term impact than whether they have a pathway to nuclear weapons?
Well, I mean, one view of Iran was they were going to become the second North Korea. And right. So far, North Korea is terrible, but they don't really have a way to use it. On the other hand, you really wouldn't like to have 7 of these countries around where any one of them can cause a nuclear war.
Because if Iran gets a nuclear weapon program, everybody in the Middle East, the Saudis,
they're all going to have one.
They're going to go.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was crazy to think about what to do. I mean, it was it isn't as if we sat there and did nothing. Iran wasn't making its comeback. There's on very good information that China was helping Iran rapidly rebuild its drone and ballistic missile force. It was providing them with the parts. It was buying their energy. They were building.
These are the things that had been damaged or destroyed
during the June. We bombed them in
war.
June. Yeah, we bombed them in June when we bombed their nuclear facilities, and they were just building back up. And you knock them down, they're getting back up. And I said I don't want to. I would have no place to say, as some people do, this was a war of choice. The timing was clearly a choice. I don't know. But President Trump clearly underestimated closing the Straits of Hormuz, of how easily he could counter that. And I think in general, we've talked about the resilience of the global economy. I wonder what you think. I mean, do you think he's been surprised at how resilient the Iranians have been?
I would assume he has to be.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
I think he was obviously impressed by what had happened in Venezuela and did not think about the differences between Iran and Venezuela. And there,
yeah, I mean, they can't afford to lose. They the ruling party, the elite in Iran, they will get dragged through the streets if they fall out of power. They're going to die, and so their backs to the wall. I have to say this war a little bit reminds me, at least me, of this Richard Gere movie where he plays Lancelot, King Arthur's
sure.
best knight, and he's in a village, and some young man, admiring him, teach me how to use the sword like that. And he says, okay, I'll give you a lesson. And so the guy has a stick and he's teaching him one thing after another. And he says, that's good. What else? What else? And Richard Gere, Lancelot, says, well, there's one more thing. You have to not care whether you live or die. And that's frames where the Iranians are in this, the Iranian ruling
They had
class.
nothing to lose, and by surviving, they won.
Yeah, well, and if they lose, they won't survive. I mean,
Exactly.
here. So, but I think any of these things you can ask your generals and your admirals and probably even your AI and the smartest people. And if you're, I'm not a general or an admiral and wouldn't know, but you get surprised in the war. What happens? The creativity, the enemy innovates, and every no battle plan survives a war.
What do you expect interest rates to become?
I think they're going to remain elevated. So let me just be clear to your listeners. There are a few different kinds of interest rates. The Federal Reserve sets the overnight lending rate. Think of it as the 1 week Treasury bill rate. So very, very, very short-term borrowing. It doesn't set long-term rates. Say that there's a 10-year U.S. interest rate that's the bellwether of the global economy. Every other interest rate in the world is set off the 10-year U.S. interest rate, all the ones that count. But your mortgage is, your car loan is, your student loan is. I mean, they're set off other things too. So that's a really key interest rate. That interest rate has been higher than many people had thought. There were many leading economists like Paul Krugman, Larry Summers, many others. Actually, I'd say the majority of the American economists, Wall Street economists, were convinced that interest rates would never go up again when they fell in the 2010s. The 10-year interest rates were scraping the bottom, lowest rates in history. And they were saying this time is different. They're going to stay down. Well, that proved wrong, and they've come up quite a bit. And now many of those same people are saying, well, okay, they're going to go back down. And I don't agree. They're very hard to predict, but they're forces that would drive them down. But demographics might. But we have very high debt in the world that drives interest rates up. People want to borrow. There's tremendous spending needs, some from populism, or you can call it redistribution, depending how you want to view it. But the military spending that's going to come in the next 5 or 10 years in China, in the United States, dare I say in Europe, it's just going to be astounding. I'm sure you are aware that President Trump asked to have the budget for his military, the U.S. military, increased roughly 50%, from 1 billion to 1.5 billion. And that probably is the tip of the iceberg. And I will say, even if the Democrats win decisively, and they'll say, we'll never approve anything, wait till we start running into trouble and see if that's true. I mean, I think that's going to eventually be a fairly bipartisan consensus, because our military spending's about half of what it was at the end of the Cold War. at the end of the 80s when the Berlin Wall fell. And that was because Russia wasn't causing a problem, China wasn't causing a problem, and there were problems. And so military spending's high. AI demands a lot of investment. You're lucky if you don't have a data center going up in your backyard. I mean, they're just being built everywhere. That costs a. In fact,
and what do you think about that?
I just want to say, if you want to look at a graph of U.S. investment, a lot of investment's been going like this, and I mean physical investment, just to be clear. And the AI is going like this, even more than in the internet age. Well, what do I think about it? I mean, about how it'll affect interest rates, that's easy.
Well, that first, and then, the consequences, because, people have begun to talk about an AI bubble.
Okay, so what it'll do to interest rates is simple. It's going to drive them up. If it's really producing growth, it drives them up because there'll be continuing investment demand. And also, everybody's going to say, oh, I'm going to be really rich in the future. Why save as much? And both of those things drive up interest rates. But I think there are much deeper issues about AI that concern me enormously. I'm sure everyone who's listening to you thinks about this. It's very hard to avoid thinking about it, just, in some aspect of your life. I worry that it's going too fast. I've always worried about that. Could you slow it down? Yeah, of course you could. You could enforce intellectual copyright. You could enforce property protection. They don't. I mean, it's unbelievable.
What would it take to slow it down, in your judgment?
Yeah, I had former students who've worked and left this space who've described to me that who are working on safety, which broadly means everything from the latest. There's the latest version of Claude, I think it is, can crack
Mythos, it's called.
Yeah, can just crack anything, and the banks are all going to get robbed, and how do we stop it?
Tom Friedman, for example, wrote a whole column about that. Said, I'm taking time off from the covering Iran war because I think this is.
Yeah. I mean, but there's a host of safety issues. I don't know if you saw the Catherine Bigelow movie House of Dynamite.
Yes, I did.
Well,
it's about the United States under attack from, I guess, North Korea or somebody.
But we don't really know if it's under attack. And that's one of the questions about AI.
That's exactly right.
Can an AI hacker, I think she was very visionary, can an AI hacker put a shadow into the command and control center of the US and maybe Russia and make everybody think something might be happening with their enemy and get them all to fire the missiles? So I've heard that worried about. I mean, it's like a range of things. I think governments have to do something. The companies just want to win. They
do what?
Oh, I think, basically they have to realize that if they don't, the simplest thing that would slow things down is what I mentioned, copyright protection. That'll get them stalled for a long time. I think there are different ways to slow it down while figuring out what to do. A lot of talk about the data centers. The part of it that I think is just wrong is we have to beat the Chinese. We just have to beat the Chinese. Maybe it's not safe, but they're going to do it anyway. We have to beat the Chinese. And the trouble with that is that we're not going to stay far ahead of the Chinese. They're going to get anything we have. That the code for the cyber hacker has been leaked already. Everybody has it. And that's going to keep happening. Maybe somebody in the community will do it. Maybe there'll be a spy. Maybe there'll be some lonely software developer somewhere in Silicon Valley, who gets turned by a spy. Who knows? But I don't think we'll stay more than 2 or 3 months ahead. So that's just a crazy criteria.
You're saying it's not going to dominate.
That's just, yeah,
Right.
it's not. It's just
Right.
not going to happen. It just leaks too fast. It's too easy. I had another great former student who, works in the space of safety in general. And I'd asked her a long time ago, so isn't it important to beat the Chinese? And she said, for what? So we can claim credit for human extinction and they can't? What's the purpose? So I do worry about it. I understand, curing diseases, amazing things that AI can do. It's amazing. But at the same time, then let's get into the economics. I've gotten into the, hysterical part.
Right.
I think it's going to lead to just massive job losses. I have friends at the very highest levels of AI because I was a chess player and followed it my whole life. And they say to me, Ken, why don't economists work on what happens when 3/4 of the jobs are gone? Why aren't you working on that? That's what they think. There's a debate in economics, to be clear. Some of my younger colleagues, when I say things like that, say, you're a Marxist. This is just going to be like everything else. It's going to be great. We're all going to be richer. It's going to be better. I just think it's happening so fast that we can't adjust quickly enough.
When will it come?
Look at the firms
tomorrow.
Yeah, it's coming over the net. We'll see massive effects by the next 3 or 4 years. It's going to lead to huge white collar unemployment coming pretty quickly. The things that might slow it down because we aren't going to enforce copyright are they can't build enough data centers. They're missing some minerals that they had to have. There's not enough copper. That stuff slows it down. I'm worried about employment. I'm very worried about the effect on social media. There must be deep fake Charlie Roses going around. There have to be. You just haven't looked if you don't know it. And, saying things and they're just looking because you're really easy. There's a million shows. They can, mimic you in any situation.
They have and sent me replicas. They've sent me in my voice. Sounds exactly like me.
No, so imagine if you're a politician or anything.
Or an actor.
Or an actor. How do you know the difference between what's real and what's not real? And people are already having trouble now, right? And dealing with the information flow. I worry about the uses in war. You mentioned the war games in London, and probably you didn't finish. You were going to mention that the AI generals always go nuclear at the end of the war game. Henry Kissinger worried about that. And I'll tell you, it may be that you laugh and say, well, don't have an AI general. But in these future wars that could pit 100,000 Chinese drones against 100,000 US drones, you have to have it, done automatically. The whole future battlefield, a human general may have no chance against an AI general. So all of certainly people in the AI world worry about this. Anthropic famously got, cut off for a while by the Trump administration over this.
With that conflict with the Pentagon.
Yeah, with the Pentagon. Okay. But yeah, and I guess one other topic on AI, getting back to pure economics, some people say, well, at least it's going to solve our budget problem because we're just going to grow and it's going to be great. And there's nothing to worry about. We'll make so much money. It doesn't matter what we borrowed. We'll pay it back. I think there are just so many reasons that that's wrong. Let me list 3. One is a lot of the money is going to go to people that are very hard to tax. I don't know how much you can tax Elon Musk or somebody who's 1/10 of Elon Musk. They're too politically powerful. That's, true all over the world. Hard to tax. Capital's getting more money, hard to tax them. Secondly, making more money doesn't mean we're not going to spend more money. The budget problems we have to do with living within our means. If you have an impecunious, relative who's just constantly spending money, you're not solving their problem by giving them more money. They're just spending that. And I think that's a good description of our budget problems. And third, they're going to create all the social disruption that may lead to policies that are counterproductive. So we've gone over a lot of issues on AI. I know that some of my junior colleagues say I'm a doomist, but I think we're not understanding all the risks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about the mythos is that they worry about that bad people will be able to use it to hack all kinds of institutions, whether it's a hospital or whether it's power centers, as you know. Talking about the fact that on issues like AI, China, that the stakes are so important that it's an area where the U.S. and China ought to cooperate. Is that possible? Is that feasible?
Who knows? I mean, of course, there are many areas where the U.S. and China ought to cooperate, but we're rivals. And I don't know if it's feasible. It doesn't seem like it is until it really gets out of control. I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, I don't think we can separate from China. I think China understands that already. I don't think Washington does. I hear from people in Washington that we're going to make ourselves completely independent of China. Good luck with that. I mean, they have
because we are totally
just start with a lot of our medicines come from the precursors to make generic drugs come from China. But there's so many different things, not just that we consume and the parts that go in, that they've gotten very important. It's just not that easy to get away from them. For example, take the drugs. Okay, you can say, let's make them in the U.S. Well, it ain't going to be profitable unless, you put a pretty big tax on the drugs coming from China, or you ban them, and you kind of have to ban them from recycling through some third country. And if you don't, who's going to invest in building the plants to make ibuprofen? They're not, because you can't do it economically. And we can go through things one by one. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's a very tall mountain to climb. I've been in groups that have sort of tried to talk this out, trade experts, military experts, including many people. And, we're going to be doing great if we can get to the point where we don't need China to sell us the parts that we're going to use to fight them. Like, if we can just get to that point, that would be a big improvement. We used to get all our drones from China until not very long ago. Can you believe that? The drones, even that our military was using, were basically coming from China. I was just, mind-numbing. We can get rid of some of these extremes, but they're very important in a lot of things. It's not that easy to break free of them.
How do we stand among the G7 countries? How do we stand as an economic entity?
I mean, the United States is the greatest economic entity in the history of the world. But more importantly, in the last 20 years, so we all know China grew very fast.
Right.
But the story just as much is that the United States separated itself from Europe and Japan. In I want to say, around 2000, Europe's economy was as big as ours. Its stock market was the same as ours. Today, its economy is, 30% smaller. I'm pulling that number out of a hat. It depends on per capita, this and that. Its stock market, what is half, 40% of where the US is today? There's a similar story about Japan. So we have been, despite all the craziness that goes on, just plowing ahead. Our system, our innovation so far, has really done amazing. I mean, there's, no question about that. I think something like 70% of the value of the world's stock market is in the United States. Can you imagine that? I mean, we're maybe 25% of output, but 70% of the value of global stock.
And a large percentage of that is tech stocks.
Yeah, a lot of the separation has been these tech stocks, which have just exploded. And you asked me about the bubble, and I kind of sidestepped it.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
So, of course, there's going to be a bursting of the bubble. Of course, there's going to be. What I can't tell you is when will it happen? How far will it go down when it bursts? So there's this famous incident where former Fed Chair Alan Greenspan, the maestro, he was there from the mid 80s to the mid 2000s. And in about halfway through his tenure, he basically said, there's a stock market bubble. It's way overvalued. It's going to blow. And he was repeating something a Nobel Prize winning economist, Robert Shiller, had said. It got a ton of publicity. He called it irrational exuberance. That was his phrase.
I remember.
And he was right. But not till a lot later. And when the stocks finally fell, they never went down to where it was when he made the call. You'd have lost money going into bonds and out of stocks if you timed it with him. So no one wants to say the same thing. It's how do we value this technology? Who knows? But it's easy to imagine that we could have a 30%, 40% drop in these tech stocks very suddenly if something came up where people saw there was a constraint. Just for example,
especially those that have committed a lot of money to AI.
Yeah, especially the ones that have committed a lot of money. But if people see that you need the data, for example, you just have to have the data center in every backyard, or you're not going to fulfill the value of these companies, that kind of thing, or litter the planet with them, and you don't have enough copper. There's a number of papers about how we don't have enough copper to do anything that we want to do, and I will find substitutes, I guess, but it's not hard to imagine that happens, but hard to call the timing of it.
There was also the question of debt. I mean, you've written about that as well. I want to talk about the debt. Puts an upward pressure on interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Even without the impact of a war, was the economy, the global economy and the American economy looking good? Or did we have certain issues that were not being addressed?
Well, both. It was looking okay before the war, surprisingly so, given all the volatility in policy. I think the economy, the word you keep hearing is resilient. And yeah, right. Exactly why that was true, there are different stories about. And the war may shake that up, but it seems to be shaking it up. But
let me interrupt you on that point. If in fact, not that the war extends, I mean, whether there's a little bit of an escalation or not, or it looks like they may have some kind of, no. How long will it take to overcome the impact of the war on the global economy?
First of all, there won't be an end to the war. There will just be a new phase. If we read today, there's a peace agreement, and you still have the same regime in power in Iran and the same regime in power in the United States. They're just agreeing that they're going to open the Strait of Hormuz for a while. There's no way. They're just not close to an agreement. But even if they magically did, and let me just pick and, just say somehow they're just not going to bother anybody for 20 years or 30 years, and it's going to be all okay.
The Iranians are not going to bother anybody?
We're not going to bother them, and they're not going to bother us. Gotcha. And Iran's going to let Israel live another couple decades before they go back to wanting to destroy them. And we just, by a sustained period of peace, it's still going to take a long time to get out of this. The markets take time to reshape. There's been quite a damage in the Middle East. The Middle East is actually become much more important than it used to. It has been growing. We talked about Saudi being the next Korea. They have been growing. They're very important in many, many things. They're in so much trouble because people aren't going to want to invest there. They're not really going to believe in it. And in general, we have, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. I have many concerns, but there are 2.5 years left. We had the tariff war. We had the Iran war. I'm grateful that he hasn't invaded Harvard yet. Although if you release this after a while, maybe that'll.
There is talk of Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba. Look, Cuba. Who knows? Who knows? What else happens? There's still a lot of uncertainty. Maybe it will all look good eventually. I don't know. But I think we're in this period where there's, a lot of unpredictability. But I think this war, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the psychology coming from the war. How are people going to feel after the war? What do they feel that's next? And I think there's, that's going to be a lasting effect. I talk to market participants and I tell them that, and they say, not a problem. And, Qatar's had all this damage to massive damage to its oil field, gas field. Aren't you worried that they're going to the Iranians will bomb pipelines and stuff? And they say, we'll rebuild them. Not a big deal. They're very blasé about it, by and large. But I feel the effect will be, measurable. You're sure the heck going to see it in inflation. Inflation's going to be high the next year, 3.5% or 4%, because the tariffs are still working their way through. The Iran war is working its way through. There's a saying about gasoline prices, they can go up very fast, but go down very slowly. I think we'll see that as well.
The reason I was asking you, Donald Trump understands that one of the reasons that he was elected in 2024 was because of inflation. That's his perception. And certainly in those 7 or 8 crucial states, you would think that the fear of inflation would have affected his political mind.
Yeah, but he doesn't like to lose. Even when he loses, he doesn't like to lose. He is at risk of having viewed as having been beaten by Iran. That's a distinct possibility. We could leave this war with Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, demanding to be paid in cryptocurrency or Chinese yuan.
But do you think he would leave it without them giving up the enriched uranium?
I think if they're controlling the Straits of Hormuz, that's pretty bad. And, frankly, if they're making a lot of money, they can buy the enriched uranium from somebody else, from North Korea. Do I know what he would do? I don't know what he would do. But if he's viewed in a year or two as having lost, it's going to be very unpleasant. And that will affect him in everything. If they see what is basically this very minor power beat him. It didn't take President Xi stood up to Trump, of course, in the tariff wars, but everybody else was scared if they see this very minor power standing up to Trump. I mean, he doesn't like it. And I think that element of it is important. It's not just his ego, okay? That's a piece of it. It's how his whole bravado, how he does every negotiation. I'm going to win. I'm going to crush you. You have to make a deal. And Iran says, no, we won't. And they get away with it. It's every enforcer in the mob, knows if somebody doesn't pay and they get away with it, they have to, off them, because if they don't, everybody else won't pay. And it's the same sort of mentality.
Has this war, in a sense, for those who don't believe in it, caused some real sense, and this would be the Europeans, and many in this country as well, the popularity of the war is not high. Is it doing something to the American image that will affect us across the board? Who we are, who we stand for, as we celebrate our 250th birthday?
There's a nature of these things that...
I'm a romantic, as you know.
And good for you. There's a nature of these things that if Trump pulls it out of the fire, gets a really meaningful change, and there's many positive ways you can tell his story that somebody had to take them on, and it looks like it worked. I think the whole world can say, I knew it all along, yes, good job. And there are
a lot of people who believe that, that he was the first person that was willing to take on the Iranians and try to eliminate the possibility of them having a nuclear weapon.
That sounds like a very worthwhile pursuit. And I wish him well. And I hope he does. It depends on how it works out. You're asking what'll be the lasting image. So it could be, a lot of times, I don't know, I'm just thinking of the analogy of this basketball coach where this kid's shooting from 35 feet away and he goes, no, no, no. And they shoot and make it. Oh, yes, yes, yes. It's sort of like that. Like he takes this big risk. If it works, they're going to say the maestro, the 4D chess or whatever. But it could easily come out something different, more of the flavor of Vietnam, where you and I, it was tough on our image.
Looking back in terms of, I've had some real questions about America, and you travel around. I mean, what do people talk about in terms of us? And do they think, for example, people who talked about Greenland and from Denmark and other places, do they think that this is just a temporary thing? Or do they think something fundamental has changed about America?
You got a mix. And first of all, different in different parts. The Europeans, it's like being in California. I'm just giving you an idea of what the view of Trump and what we're doing is. The Asians, it's a little bit more like being in Florida, where there's a mix. Some people think, good, there's a strong president doing something. There's a mix.
What worries you the most of all about America in 2026? Engaged in a war in Iran, questions having to do with the power of AI. What worries you? You're a really smart guy.
As are you and many of the viewers. I think AI worries me the most. If I think about my kids and what everyone's doing in the future and how we would adjust, what will our society look like? What will human relationships work like? I worry about that a lot. I'm hopeful the war, somehow the U.S. and China have a common interest in having peace in the Middle East, having the Straits of Hormuz open, and we're going to come back to that. So we are richer than any country's ever been. Our wealth is incredible. We can afford to owe a lot of money. But that doesn't mean that we don't get in trouble. Rich people go bankrupt all the time. And, I think we are probably going to have a deficit on the order of 7.5% of GDP, something like that this year. Our debt's at a record high relative to income. And super importantly, interest rates have come up. And I want to say, Charlie, I have not talked about U.S. debt until my most recent book, the last year. I was not going around worrying about U.S. debt. I worried about inflation, but I wasn't saying there'd be a crisis in U.S. debt. Why would there be? It can slow our growth. It can have problems. It's not a plus. I did say that, but I didn't think there'd be a crisis. But it's reaching the point where interest payments are now more than defense spending. Our friend Neil Ferguson has this thing called Ferguson's Law, that's the end of you as a leading power. Exaggerated, but a good point. Defense interest rates are on track to be the biggest item in the budget. If we went back 6 years ago, they were nothing. I mean, the combination of the sharply rising debt and the sharply rising interest rates is a problem. Well, why don't we solve it? We could, but there's no will in either party. It doesn't matter that the Republicans are in power. It wouldn't matter. I'm just going to facetiously say President Mamdani, because he can't be president because he's not American born. If President Mamdani, comes into office in a few years and the Democrats sweep, we're still going to have debt problems. Why? Because the voter in the United States has not seen a really big government debt problem for a very, very long time, really. Arguably, you'd have to go back to our default in the 30s to talk about that, when we changed the price of gold was a form of default. Other countries have, but we have not. We're like teenagers that think they're immortal and you can just
And what's the difference in other countries and us?
Well,
leadership for one.
Our leadership and the fact people use the dollar means there are more foreign holdings of dollars. It is about close, if you did market holdings, close to 1 in every 3 treasury bills is held abroad. So that lets you borrow more, but not 3 times more, maybe 50% more. And we're at that, where we're borrowing 50% more. We've been very successful as an economy. I mean, we've done well. So in principle, we could pay off the debt, but try getting higher taxes. I mean, I had just met with a Republican senator, who said there's no way ever, there's going to be higher taxes in this regime. And a Democratic senator who said, well, we're going to get it all out of the 1%, which is like utter nonsense, but we're not going to tax everybody else. And they're not prepared to cut anything. And, I could go on and on. We're again like teenagers who think they're immortal, drinking and driving or driving a car too fast and not realizing that it's risky. And I think eventually we will run into a problem. So we don't have to, but it's not like I could go tell someone what to do because that person wouldn't get elected. The voter doesn't believe it. So I think we definitely have a debt.
But then when you say that, I just think, I do believe that that's a question of leadership and a question of the capacity to educate the public. That shows you how naive I am, but I do believe that the right person, the right leadership can come along.
Well, I accept
because
that,
we've
Charlie.
seen the right leadership come along and preach a bad message and be elected.
But that person is probably not going to come along until we've had a crisis and people are ready to listen to them. At the moment, they'll be dismissed and say, you should get taxed less, we should spend more. And by the way, we have to build up our military. If the Democrats are in power, hopefully they'll go back to worrying about the environment. All these things are expensive, dealing with inequality, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea of budget constraints is very unpopular, very unpopular. So is all I can say about that.
But you can say about this. Suppose someone is elected and they come to you and they say, tell me, Ken, the four most important things I can do, notwithstanding political feasibility. What do I need to do so that my children and my grandchildren will live in a better and stronger place?
Oh, I didn't know where you were coming at the end of that. That's a very deep question because it's about our human relationships and the society we live in.
Oh, I want to hear you say that then.
No, well, I mean, there are religious questions. I don't feel, authority to talk about, but I think some kind of moral grounding of our society is important. This has been a rough period for that on both sides. Obviously, particularly characteristically with President Trump. But, there's sort of a question of what's the moral grounding of our society. I think that's been you talk about the 250th anniversary of the United States. That's been very important that we felt we've been morally grounded. I'm a big Star Trek fan. And, the whole core of that was that they're trying to do good in the universe as opposed to the world. And I think that's important. I think we have to come to grips, obviously, with inequality. And it's not easy to do that. I can tell you on the economic side, we certainly, if we could hold the fort, we should have a much simpler tax system that had basically a value-added tax like they have in Europe. That's a kind of sales tax on everything. That's regressive. But then you have some kind of universal basic income where you give a basic income to everybody. I think that's a pretty simple system that would be better. I don't say it's politically that you could get there. If you were there, I don't know if you could politically keep it. I think that would be a good system. We need to have a complete rethinking of education, which is sort of at every level, including I teach at the university level, of trying to educate people for life, trying to make it more compelling, more interesting, because that's part of being a citizen, being able to be empowered. And then I guess there's a very important question about, how we maintain a more civil society than we have. I think we've drifted a lot on that. I mean, I think of these things I'm probably missing 10 of them, and you'll help me out by adding some. But I mean, we want to live in a society where we're grounded, where, people feel fulfilled, can raise families. Hopefully some will have families, et cetera.
There is a term, and help me with this in chess, about a poisoned pawn.
No, there are openings where it's called a poison pawn variation, because if you take that, your queen runs off and takes that very tempting pawn, your queen, which is your most powerful piece, will have gobbled up a weak piece, but find itself in completely the wrong part of the board and wish that it hadn't gone off that way. And so there are whole variations that way where you're tempting the opponent to, grab something. It seems free, but it's not so free.
Is that part of what we're doing? We're taking some easy look at.
I have not, it is very hard to be a leader in a real world with real people and real problems. But certainly when it comes to economics, it has been a long time since we've really grappled with fundamental problems. Bill Clinton did, I think, in some ways. Ronald Reagan did. But it's really been a long time since that's happened. I mean, Obama did something I think very important with respect to healthcare. I think Trump actually has got some things right about trying to ask what's the right balance between the government and the private sector. There's a temptation to think the government's always smarter. We should tell the private sector what to do. We should have all kinds of rules. And the trouble is, it doesn't always work.
Warren Buffett used to say, nobody ever got rich betting against America. In the end, do I hear you saying, notwithstanding all of our issues, notwithstanding new norms, notwithstanding debt, notwithstanding these cultural issues, notwithstanding some sense of kindness and civility, all kinds of things that crept into who we are still a remarkable experiment and have a better future than anybody I can think of.
Well, for sure. But, there's a lot of risk around that, around war, AI. We talked last time about the future of the dollar, right? And ways we can lose some of our power. So you can certainly, do well, but Europe's doing okay, right? Yes. But they don't feel good about it. Let me tell you, they feel like they really lost out. If things don't go well, we're not going to be, suddenly a very poor developing country. But it just took 20 years, 25 years for Europe to go from thinking they were being our equal to surpassing us to getting left in the dust. And I think it's a little naive to think there couldn't be these ebbs and flows. We worried China was going to do that to us. I would say not yet.
We worried first that Japan was going to do it to us.
Yeah, we worried Japan's going to do it to us, but I wouldn't conclude it's never going to happen. But not tomorrow.
This is so interesting for me. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you again. You're such an icon and have had such a storied legacy in journalism. To get to talk to you, it'd be fun even if we're not being recorded. I would be having a great time. I'd make you talk more, but I was frustrated about that. But you know your job, and it's to get me to talk, and you did.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
a great
me.
Weekend.
And you too.
Join me, become a subscriber to Charlie Rose Global Conversations, and make it a better experience. Click this link to subscribe.